Welcome. I'm Riley Karsh.
I'm Tova Kopan.
We are thrilled to bring you the We Go Boldly podcast.
Let's talk big burning questions, life changes, and maybe a bit of personal business.
Let's be bold and brave together. Are you ready?
I am. Here comes the show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to We Go Boldly, the podcast. It's more of season 10. It is a topic today on how to be creative. And we are going to dive into kind of all the things that get in the way of being creative. Plus, as we like to do this season, and the whole point of the season, really how to be creative. So it's two sides of the same coin, whatever that phrase is. We're talking all about it today. We're going to dive into it. This is something near and dear to my heart as a creative person, as an artist, as a writer. This whole topic speaks to me on many levels. So I'm excited to talk about it. Before I get into all of the how-tos of being creative, let's welcome Tova, my amazing co-host, to the show and see how she's doing today.
Well, let's see. I don't know, man, but I'm decorated for spring. If you're watching the episode on YouTube, this is the first one where you'll see a little bunny behind me.
Mm-hmm.
A little bunny's tush, more specifically, because it's super cute. And it's crazy because you're listening to this episode and I have already had surgery and I'm like in recovery and I assume I'm doing great. Like I'm just chilling and like hanging out post-surgery, watching TV. I think I might be watching Peaky Blinders. I think that might be a recovery show.
I think that's a good choice.
Yeah, I've never watched it, and
It's
I actually forgot that it was on one of my lists. And then I saw a funny meme this morning, or funny thing. I think I sent it to
Yeah, you
you.
sent it to me. I've seen that one before and I really I enjoy
And
it.
I was like, oh my gosh, I forgot about this show. And
Yeah.
I've been looking for shows just as like a quick detour. Um, and I'm sure I will be able to figure out a way to connect it to being creative. But, you know, I love television. I love watching TV. And I have been trying to find some comfort shows. And one comfort, I have not wanted though to be rewatching shows all the time because there's so many new shows out there. There's so many shows I haven't watched. And yet a lot of the more newer shows I do not find comfort in. There's just a lot going on, right? There's
Yeah.
just so much happening and the seasons are really short and obviously there's aberrations like Virgin River is a comfort show. Ted Lasso is a lovely comfort show. Which Riley has still not watched unless she watched it and never told me.
No, I don't really watch much TV.
I
And that
know.
is not from a moral standpoint. It's very hard for me to get into any shows. It's not
Yeah,
that I'm
yeah.
judging anyone who watches TV. I wish I could because it would be very relaxing.
But I have found that watching older shows that I've not watched before, like, so I recently watched Alias, and even though Alias is a spy, like, intense show, like Intense from 2001 on network television versus
Right. It's
Intense
very
now,
different. It's very
very, very
different. It's
different.
true. I
Yeah.
hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
so I really enjoyed it, but I'm looking at like what am I going to watch when I'm chilling out, recognizing like even when you're at home not working, recovering from surgery, like the kids are still at school for like 4 minutes.
Yeah.
Like you don't actually have that much time to watch TV.
No.
But Peaky Blinders might be one of them.
I think
Anyway,
that's a great
yeah.
choice. I watched the first season and a half. That's about that's my attention span for anything.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but it was very entertaining. It is super violent though, so I'm interested to see how you tolerate that because that's not your jam usually.
I mean, I oddly don't mind violent
Oh,
shows.
interesting. Okay. But normally you watch happy shows. This is not a happy show.
Yeah, it's I'm trying to think. I don't really, me, if I don't want to see the violence, I just ignore it.
Yeah. It's just not happening.
I'll
Um,
be like, this is a great detective drama and listen to those fun accents.
right.
Like,
The other show I've watched the first lately, have watched the first season of, and it took me a very long time, is the show Good Girls. I think I mentioned it to you.
yes, you told me you texted me about that.
Um, And it's just like a little mind-blowing because it's like about these, and we will get to being creative, but it's about these three women who are like lifelong friends, two are sisters, and they turn into criminals. And it's like fascinating in certain ways. And it's also, about marriage and parenting and all those things, but like they turn to a life of crime, which is like an interesting choice to make. But I haven't finished it. I can't. I got bored. I had to stop. Um, that's just the way my brain works. I'll come back to it eventually one day, and then I'll know
Yeah.
how it ends. Um, but with all of that being said, let's talk about being creative because it takes a lot of creativity to make these shows. And I feel like a jerk when I say I get bored and stop listening because like I
Well,
know how much effort and heart and soul go into these things. It's not like people are just like snapping their fingers and there it is, it's done.
so it's so funny you say that, speaking of being creative, because I do think that creative people sometimes, or maybe even not creative people, I don't know. I think sometimes we put pressure on ourselves that we think things should be easier than they are, or in the reverse, that things should be harder than they are. Like that sometimes we don't trust things if they come too easily,
Oh, yeah.
right? So if we're enjoying something, maybe we're enjoying something that it becomes that is creative to us. Like maybe we take up, we want to do watercolor. So we just, we get one of those things off of Amazon where you can like, the watercolors are next to the paper and you just love doing it and it's so relaxing and you're like, but this should be harder. And people are like, oh, it looks so pretty. And you're like, well, clearly it's because there's this great kit and I'm not good at it. It should be harder than it is.
Yeah. I
Or
definitely think
the
there's that. Yeah.
or the reverse. And I say it because I am listening to Matthew Perry's memoir, which is a whole rabbit hole that we will not get down.
No.
But it's fascinating. And he had just said, because I'm in the part where he's trying to write some TV shows, and he's like, people think it's easy. And I wanted to be like, I don't think anyone thinks it's easy. This
Well,
might be
there
a
are
problem
people
that
who do. There are people who do. But
maybe.
yes, I agree. Most people recognize the challenge of coming up with an innovative new idea.
I mean,
Anyway.
you and I stumbled upon one a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, but that's because we had done a lot of the things we're about to talk about. Whether we did them intentionally or not,
Yes,
we
yes.
had done them. So let's get into it. The first thing, and I think this rolls right into what you were just talking about, is like talking about what is creativity, right? Because there's a
Hmm.
lot of misconceptions around the concept of being creative. And for the vast majority of people, a lot of times if you say, oh, well, I'm a creative, people think, oh, well, you are an artist or a musician, or you write, or it's something in the field of the arts, right? And that is not accurate. Now, that is not to say that creative people can't be artists or artisans or whatever. But creativity itself is about the idea that you're problem solving and innovating, right? And so
Mm.
that relates to every aspect of life, whether you're in corporate America and you have to solve a problem, or if you're, living in Santa Fe and have an art studio in the desert. Either way, you're coming up with innovative ways of doing things and thinking. And so
Well,
creativity is about thinking.
I mean, in corporate America, isn't it called like outside of the box thinking?
Right. Yeah. Or
Yeah.
innovation, right? Like, or,
Yeah.
those kinds of things. And so I think when we step outside of that sort of unfortunate pigeonholing of that concept of creativity, it becomes something where people feel like they can also take ownership in it. Because if you are somebody who's like real bad at painting, can't draw, like all those things, which I don't like saying it that way because everyone can do that stuff. It's just takes practice and effort and whatever. But if that's not your jam, like if that's not your thing, and you're like, well, I'm just not creative. That's probably not true. You probably creatively, if you're a mom, you're creative because you're problem solving all day long, right?
Yeah.
If you're a parent, I should say, if you're a dad, you're a mom, you're whatever, you are problem solving and coming up with innovations because you forgot the diaper bag, or somebody wants a snack and you're in the middle of the forest, or like you are problem solving. So we're all creative. It's just changing that perception of how we talk about it, and
Yeah.
also like cultivating the mindset, right? So we were just, you mentioned, Tova, like we were on our winter retreat and we came up with this whole idea. And I'm not going to share the whole idea yet because we're still working on it. Um, but we came up with this whole idea that was super creative. It was like all, imagination and use of storytelling and things like that. And why did that happen for us at that moment? A lot of people think that creativity just strikes, right? Like that it's like lightning and it hits you and that's it. And if that doesn't happen, you can't be creative. And that's just not accurate. Now,
Right.
it is accurate in the sense that sometimes you get a creative lightning bolt, right? Where you're like, oh, I have this great idea. Um, but typically that is because you have set yourself up to have a space in which you can be creative.
Yes.
Um, so one of the most important ways you can sort of cultivate that creative mindset is by nurturing it, by adopting a growth mindset, which is a whole episode in and of itself, which we will probably get to at some point this season.
This is the
Um,
second time we've said this in a row, so I think it's
yeah,
going to have
yeah, I
to
think it's
happen.
coming. But it a lot of people will say, and I think this showed up in a study somewhere. I did the research and I honestly can't remember because I did it so long ago, but I believe there was a study. Either way, there was a scientist who has said most creative people will admit that their creativity is 10% talent and 90% hard work, the practicing and polishing of their skills. Right. So it's work to be creative. You have to put some effort into it. It's rare that it's just gonna like I said, lightning bolt out of the sky and hit you.
Well, and I think, as you said, if there is a lightning experience, it's because you have cultivated the atmosphere in your life or your brain that allows for that to happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like in Elizabeth Gilbert's The Magic of
Thinking, oh no, the
Thinking,
magic. No, that's somebody else. Is that
no,
her? I don't
The
know.
Magic of Thinking Big, The Magic of Big Things, Big. I'll look it up. I'll look it up. But in that, she talks about sort of like an idea coming like a bubble and how it kind of like comes in, like it shows up. Like when she's ready, this idea can kind of come into her head like a bubble. But then if she doesn't use it, it will leave, right?
Right.
Like it will keep moving, almost like she doesn't own the idea. Like the idea is there in the universe, and it just happens that Big Magic is the name of the
That's
book.
it. Yep.
Um,
Well done.
and like almost like she doesn't own it, right? She doesn't own the idea, but the idea is out there, and she just happens to have cultivated this space for it to land.
Yeah.
And then if she doesn't use it, though, it will go find another space.
Yeah.
But
And
either way, she has created a place for it.
and she's called it in, right? Like we talk
Yeah.
about this when we get into the more spiritual side of our research and understanding, and that it's like you can call in from the universe different aspects of life. And one of those is creativity. You can call that into yourself. But again, you're still sort of cultivating that creative mindset. You're adopting a growth mindset. You're doing the work, the day-to-day effort of growing that creativity. Another study that I read, which I found very interesting, was a professor of psychiatry at Harvard coined this phrase called positive constructive daydreaming, which I had never heard the term, but I've certainly done the thing. And essentially, what he was saying, this psychiatrist was saying, is you can create a form of daydreaming that then cultivates that creative mindset. And so in positive constructive daydreaming, you set aside a time every day to daydream. You get rid of outward distractions, sensations, things like that. You relax, you do nothing or like something low key. Like my mom loves to weed and she would say like when I'm weeding, I'm just like it's physical, but it's also taking me out of my body. She's like, it's more meditative for her. For me, it's a nightmare. I hate weeding. So like you find some, people who knit often say this, that like if they're
Yeah.
sitting there knitting, it's very like soothing and relaxing, things like that. But those sort of repetitive tasks that don't require a lot of a lot of attention will give you the space to do that. And then I think this is really the key, not judging your ideas, allowing them to go through you. Because as they say in talking about this positive constructive daydreaming, good ideas come out of bad ones, right? You might have like 14 terrible ideas, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, but wait, this one thing, and that's the good idea. And that's like, there's nothing wrong with that. It's totally normal and wonderful and great.
Well, and
Um,
in corporate speak, let's just talk corporate for a minute. This is
yeah,
having brainstorm sessions. This is doing like a brain dump, right? Like this is taking time to sit there and just like maybe you wouldn't call it daydreaming, but this is taking the time to like do a brain dump
yeah,
and just letting ideas come out of you and not judging them. And then this is saying like being willing as a person or a company to fail, to try things out, to let some ideas come out and see what happens. All of those things are being creative, but in corporate speak land.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, so when you are thinking about being creative and what creativity means for you, it's important that you think about all different kinds of inspiration. So we've just talked about a mindset, right? Like, how do you get yourself into the mindset? How do you do this constructive daydreaming? How do you do those things? But like, what are the other sources of inspiration that you could draw from to be more creative in your life? So I have this list of like 12D things that you can do, and I want to go through some of them because some of them are pretty self-evident, but some of them are not as much. Um, so a couple like obvious ones that we've talked about ad nauseum, right? Daily personal journaling. I would encourage you, and I struggle with journaling, and I'm a writer. So like if you're out there struggling with journaling, don't feel bad. I would encourage you to do a to use prompts
I was
because
just going to say this. Yeah.
that is like one of the easiest ways to overcome the hurdle of like, I don't even know what to put in this journal. I'm drawing little doodles of flowers. Like I don't know what to do. So if you can find some journal prompts, or we have some on our website, I think. Um
Mm-hmm.
if you I think, right, if you sign up for our newsletter, you can get access to all those free things on our website. Um but using journal prompts really will make it a lot easier. And a couple other obvious things: embracing mistakes and accidents. Lots of innovation has come out of mistakes and accidents. One of the most famous, of course, is penicillin. That came from an accident. So all of like, and to be clear, that's creativity, right? Like it might be science, but it's still creative. Trying out different artistic endeavors, doing different, like even if you're not trying to be creative as an artist, using art to tap into your creative thought processes is a great way to stimulate that for yourself. Like if you need to be more creative at work, maybe take up painting or drawing or the guitar or whatever. That might help stimulate that part of your brain. So there's just some of the obvious ones. One that I really like and hate at the same time is the idea of appreciating boredom. Now, I'm not good at being bored. Like that's a struggle for me. It's always been a struggle for me. I see it playing out with my kids. It's a struggle for them. Parenting is fun. Um, but boredom gives you space to daydream, right? Boredom gives you space to like allow other things to come into your brain. So, not constantly filling your space with noise, with distraction, with sounds or sights or tastes, and all of the sensory things is one way to kind of trick your brain into going into that creative mode. Because if you're bored, what are you left with? Your imagination. We say it to our kids all the time. Like, if you're bored, my answer to boredom is either you can do chores or you can entertain yourself. Those are your options. So it tricks you into kind of becoming more creative. Um, and another thing I liked is this idea of being intentionally observant. So if
Mm.
you're trying to become more creative or to change your, get that creative mindset, um, being very intentional about your observations is one way to do this. And that sort of goes along with this other idea that I read about of like asking the quote right questions. Now, what that means is like asking a question and then asking it like 14 different ways until you get the way that triggers you to think about it in a creative sense. I hopefully that makes sense. But I
Yeah.
liked those ideas.
Yeah, and I was just thinking, I'm still kind of thinking on back on the trying creative things. Like I was daydreaming myself and thinking about some of these things because I think people are like, well, okay, but how do I get painted? Like how do I get painting or how do I start and try a guitar? There are
Sure.
so many apps. Like I know one of the things is like get away from your phone, but like there are apps to teach you how to play guitar. There are apps to teach you how to play piano. You can go to one of those paint sip and paint places that will and it's amazing how one night at those painting places can feel like you're suddenly an artist.
Right.
Even if you're like, I don't know what I'm doing here.
Yeah.
Or even just like honestly, like I have my own crayons that my kids don't know about and aren't allowed to use. Like,
Yep.
and my own coloring books. Like, and I know that was a big fad at one point, but like it can be very relaxing.
Yeah.
I don't find coloring to be particularly relaxing because I obsess over what colors to use. And then it is because apparently my perfectionist tendencies come out when I color, but other people find it relaxing.
They do, but also like if that's you, they have color by numbers. I mean, they have solved this problem for
Ooh,
us. So
that is
you
a
can
great
get
idea.
coloring books that are color by numbers. You can get painting that's paint by numbers for adults. You can get all kinds of things. So if you want to take out the what's the word I want? The thinking about it, right? The like
And I even have
worrying
sticker
about,
books. I got myself like adult sticker books where
yeah.
like you line up the stickers and like maybe that doesn't feel like so I like thinking of being creative as creating, right? Like so sometimes creative is like thinking about something and daydreaming, but sometimes being creative is just creating something. And
Yeah.
so if there's a paper that doesn't have stickers on it, and then there's a paper that has a picture made up of stickers, I've created something and that feels good. Like when you create something pretty, it feels good.
Yeah, it
Um
does.
so
Absolutely.
there are just as going back to talking about like how do I do these things? There are so many tools out there to help you do these things. But going back to the stepping away from screens, even though I just gave some suggestions about ways screens can help you, getting away from screens can be a big one because it is hard to remember how to be bored when you're sitting in front of your phone all the time.
Yeah, and it's so easy to just scroll right through whether it's Insta or Facebook or TikTok, wherever. It's very easy to scroll through and become like numb to what's going on
Yes.
around you. And I'm not suggesting that's never a good idea. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's a useful thing to do. But when we find ourselves doing it all the time, um that's going to turn off your creativity. It's going to numb that like it numbs everything else. Yeah. So a couple more ideas. Playing and pretending. So it might feel ridiculous at first to do something like this. Because we're adults, right? And it's like, oh, I'm not playing right now. But if you become a beginner at something, right? Like you do something brand new. Maybe you never learned how to hacky sack. I don't know why I'm thinking about that, but I am. Maybe you never learned how to. And now as an adult, you're like, I'm going to learn how to hacky sack and stand in front of ivory color covered brick buildings and pretend I'm at Harvard. I don't know. Like pretend, be out there and try different things. And then exploring future possibilities in that pretend, right? Like, what if I had get a wig, what if I had pink hair? I don't know, you can do all kinds of different ways of playing and pretending that help you stimulate again the creative mindset that we're looking to get into. And then you know finally there's brainstorming. Now Tova, you talked about this a little bit, and it is something that can help us get creative, and it can also be overwhelming. So there are directed ways of brainstorming that I think are very useful. Um, and it I want to highlight, like I keep saying it, but I want to say it one more time, or maybe 12 more times, who knows. It's not the activities we're talking about are not about being creative specific to your end goal. It's about turning on your creative brain. so that you can be creative towards whatever it is you're trying to be creative towards. So, like,
Right.
when you're brainstorming, maybe think about something weird and come up with a list about it. And some of the suggestions in the research I did was like, make a list of the uses for an umbrella. What are 10 uses for an umbrella? Or alternative ways to use shoes, or what would you do with a phone without a battery in it? Like, and the answer to that is irrelevant, right? It's about getting creative and using your brain in a way that is creative. Um, the same another similar idea is listing unusual uses for common household items. Um, and you could set a timer, and this could be a journal prompt, frankly. You could set a timer and then like just start listing ideas. Maybe you have a spatula and you're like, what could I do with a spatula that is not flipping pancakes? And just make a list. And again, it's turning on that creative brain. This last suggestion that I read, I found fascinating, had never heard of, and they call it toppling. Um, and it's a free association technique, and this might be good in corporate America too, because you could do it in like at a retreat or something like that.
Right.
But you can so what the idea is you use free association to keep generating new words. So, but as you generate new words, there's supposed to be a different kind of connection between each word. So, to make it clearer, there's an example here of if you start with carrot, you can't free associate another vegetable. So, you might say stick, and then somebody might say glue, and then somebody might say, paper, because we're kind of moving through different associations with each one. But you're taking it in a different direction. And so the purpose of this again is to turn on that creative brain. If you start thinking outside the box in this exercise, it will help you think outside the box in other exercises.
Yeah, we should keep talking, but before we do, we need to take a break because it's been a long time. And I started to when I read the outline the other day, I'm now remembering that I started to try toppling and it was totally fascinating when I started doing it because it is crazy and it makes me wonder. I want to try it during like a road trip to see if we can just do it in the car and see what happens.
Yeah.
Almost like something that you would do during improv.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it comes from that. It's very related. It's very much
Right.
related.
Right. Um, but so let's take a quick break and then we will come back and talk about just ways that we can try to find, inspiration and creativity just as we're experiencing every day. So maybe not as we sit down and say, all right, today I'm going to think about carrots and sticks and rocks and scotch, but as we're looking around. So we're going to take a quick break and we will be right back.
Well, hello there, ladies. Are you ready to elevate your life and connect with like minded souls? Join us every week at the Go Boldly Together weekly Women's Circle, where strength meets sisterhood. Dive into empowering discussions, share your victories, and navigate challenges together. Our circle is a safe space for growth and inspiration. Experience the power of collective wisdom and unleash your full potential. Don't miss out on the transformative energy. Click the link in our show notes or visit us at goboldlyinitiative.com/women's weekly group to learn more about our Go Boldly Circle today. Together, let's embrace the journey of personal development and let's celebrate that unstoppable force within each of us.
Okay, welcome back. So, apparently, now you did the research, but in a 2010 study published in the Creativity Research Journal, which I did not know existed, but I'm excited that
I
it
do now.
does. Spending time in a natural setting can help with creativity. So there are 5 specific environmental factors that were found to boost creativity. And I'm sure it is not being, stuck in a concrete jungle. But complex visual details in the environment, such as paintings or art, um, which I find really interesting. I was going to just keep going with the list, but I'm totally fascinated by that because I would actually think calming visual details, but Anyway, complex visual details in the environment, such as paintings or art, views of the natural environment, like sitting next to a window with a view of nature, natural materials, such as wood, fewer cool colors used, such as blue and purple, and less use of manufactured materials, such as plastic. Does fewer cool colors used, such as blue and purple, mean more not cool colors used?
Yeah, I think so. That's the way I read it.
So like more reds and pinks and
More reds, yellows,
yellows.
oranges
Okay,
on that side. Um,
interesting.
well, typically those are considered like stimulating colors, right?
Yep,
Whereas blues,
yep,
purples, greens are calming colors. So I get it.
yeah,
Um, and I would add to this list, everybody is different, right?
yeah,
So this is a generalization. Like this worked for the majority of people in this study, but that doesn't mean it's going to work for, every single person listening today. But I think that the suggestions here are worth looking deeper into to see. Sometimes I feel like, oh, if I was just in a bare space, I would be like able to really focus and like look inward and all those things. But sometimes that actually just deadens everything, right? Where you're just like, where's the art? Where's the color? Where's the space around me?
yeah,
So I get it. I don't know if I 100% agree with it, but I'm not a scientist. I didn't do this study. They're telling us this is what happened. So I'm taking them at face value.
yeah. No, no, I believe them. I believe the study. I'm just like, this sounds all very stressful.
Yeah, I don't know that it would work for me. Well, certain things would, but like I don't know if all of it
Yeah,
would.
no, no, but I like it. And but I think what is important to know is that my biggest takeaway is that you can create an environment that does stimulate creativity.
Right.
Like, so that is doable and it's doable for you, right? So you can figure out what that environment looks like. And you can figure it out both for I want to be more creative at work. I want to have more ideas at work. Maybe it's I'm overwhelmed with the space around me and I'm always feeling like I'm not coming up with any ideas. Or maybe it's I want to be more creative at home, or I do want to tap into my creative side, whatever it might be, whatever type of creativity you're looking for. If you are not being creative, right? Um, there is a way to change your environment to figure that out. So maybe it is more art and paintings, and maybe having stuff around you will be inspiring, and adding pops of color and things like that is what you need to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, One thing that came up in the research over and over again that I kind of knew would, but I was like, I don't know how we're going to talk about this, but we're just going to talk about it. And that is the role of vulnerability in the creative process. And if you are an artist of any kind, I think you probably know this really well because doing some sort of art, creating some sort of artwork, and then putting it out in the world is for a lot of people horrifying, right? Like it's a terrifying thing to do. Um, and it makes you extremely vulnerable because if you're a painter, if you're a photographer, if you're a writer, the thing you have created is a part of you. And so you take criticism pretty personally. You have to learn not to, but I think that's a challenge for most people. Um, but I also think on the on a deeper side of looking at how vulnerability plays into creativity, I think it's very hard to be creative in any way, in any environment, whether it's corporate, um, home life, friendships, if you're creating art, whatever it is, it's hard to be creative without being vulnerable in some way, whether it's like opening yourself up to criticism, to somebody saying that's not a good idea. Why would we do that with the company mission statement? Um,
Right.
you know, like opening yourself up to those risks is frightening for a lot of us, right? Like if we stop and think about it. Um, but our favorite Brene Brown, she said this like way back when and has been saying it ever since, that vulnerability is the birthplace of joy, creativity, belonging, and love. Right? So when we become more vulnerable, and I think we had a whole episode on this, but I can't remember at this point. Um, when we allow ourselves to be more vulnerable, we open ourselves to that creative flow, the creative spirit in our minds.
Well, and we talked last week or a couple weeks ago about the stopping negative self-talk.
Mhm.
And if you are not letting yourself be open, if you're constantly shutting down ideas, if you're not letting yourself pick the colors that you're using to color because you're afraid it's the wrong color and you're hearing a
Yeah.
voice and you're like, well, that's the wrong color. That's the wrong color. So you're not even getting as far as coming up with a creative idea because you're like, well, that's wrong. That's wrong. That's wrong. You're not letting yourself be vulnerable. And maybe you're not letting yourself be open to criticism from yourself. Maybe you're not letting
Yeah.
yourself be open to criticism from somebody else. Wherever it is, you're going to have to let yourself be vulnerable in order to participate in the creative process.
Yeah. And I want to reiterate that this applies outside of like the traditional arts, right? This applies
Yes.
whether you're trying to be creative and problem solve in, maybe you're a resident in a hospital and you're trying to come up with creative solutions to a new sort of issue that a patient is facing.
Yeah.
And you have to talk to your superior whose name I don't remember what they call them. Um, but whatever it is, like that requires vulnerability. And so even if you are taking those risks, um, it's still like an opportunity to turn on that creative mindset and a chance to come up with interesting and innovative ways of doing things.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So I know we just took a break, but just in the interest of making sure we take one more break before we end the episode, let's take one more break and then we'll talk about what we can do when we want to be creative, but we hit creative roadblocks and it's in our way. So we're trying, but we're stuck. So let's take a quick break and we will be right back. Hey there, Pod family. Have you ever wished you could stay in the loop with a little slice of transformation and inspiration delivered straight to your inbox? Well, you're in luck because now you can. Introducing our fantastic newsletter, your VIP pass to all things exciting and informative. Join our community of growth minded souls. Get the hottest topics delivered right to your inbox. It's quick, easy, and totally free. Just head over to our website at goboldlyinitiative.com and sign up for our newsletter today. Don't miss out on the next big thing. Stay connected with us. Subscribe now and get ready for some big, bold love. Okay, so welcome back, everybody. So, what happens when you want to be creative, but you need to overcome creative blocks, right? So, the first step is to identify the common barriers to creativity. We've talked about them a bunch so far. The big one is fear of failure, and then hangs out with its best friend, perfectionism. The two of them like to hang out and kick you while you're down, or maybe one of them pushes you down, and then the other one
Right. The
kicks
other
you.
one steps on you.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so I'm reading this and it says one thing is functional fixedness.
Fixedness. It's a tough word. I don't even know if it's
Yeah,
real, but
is a term
it's apparently real.
is used by psychologists and means to only see the obvious ways of looking at a problem, often due to learned patterns. So this to me sounds like the obstinate opposite of creativity, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah. So the way that this was described in the research and the issue that this sort of common creative block creates is that you have very linear thinking.
yeah.
And if you only see things one way, and if you like there is a right way to do everything for you, then you might be stuck in this sort of functional fixedness, whatever the words are.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and a lot of that comes from how you've been raised, what your family systems look like. Some of it can come from your own brain and the way your brain works. um but the point of this is overcoming functional fixedness requires you to get into that creative mindset, and you have to be vulnerable. You have to be willing to risk being wrong, which for a lot of us is a horrifying thought. Um, and making mistakes and taking the wrong path and all of those things. Um, so yeah, I think it's a very common experience for people when they get, especially people who are, like experts in a field, right? And you've
Yeah.
been doing something a certain way for decades. And then, you have to think about it in a different way that can be very challenging. And so that's, I think, when this really comes into play.
Well, I think like it's not just like, sometimes it can be like, well, that we've never done it that way. And
Hmm.
sometimes it can just be like, I've never done it, right?
Yeah.
Like, I've never been a writer. I've never been a guitar player. I've never been a painter. It's one of the reasons, and we haven't said that this recently in a while, but it's one of the reasons that we are constantly encouraging you to try new things.
Yeah.
Because then that argument of, well, we've never done that before really is less of a useful, good argument.
Right.
Because, well, you've never done it before. Fine, cool. Now's your chance. Like, who cares that you've never done it before? Do it now.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that is, it's this is a great example of like, okay, try something new. And so that's why we encourage you to constantly be trying new things
Yeah.
because when the stakes are higher, you're like, well, me not having done it before is not an excuse to not do it now. Um,
Yeah. And I think this entire list of common, creative blocks and things that get in the way of our creativity is is related to that, right? Like it's the
yeah,
whole point of all of these blocks is that they're getting in the way of us being creative because either we learned a certain way of thinking, we've been told this is the only way to do something. We've got, whatever our family dynamics were, family systems were growing up, we've
yeah,
been indoctrinated into a culture of thinking a certain way. And that can really get in the way of us being creative, right? Because if you spent your whole life thinking you had to do something a certain way or you had to
yeah.
think about something a certain way, it's very hard to overcome.
Yes, 100%. And that goes hand in hand with the next one, right? Which is self-censorship, which we have talked about already, which is the inner voice that holds you back, right?
Hmm.
And says like, don't make a fool of yourself, don't be stupid, don't look stupid. You've never done this before, this is never going to work. We've talked about how Michelle Obama has talked about that voice and said and kind of says, listen, the voice is trying to protect you, right? It's trying to say, like, hey, you've never done this before. Stay safe, stay safe, stay safe. But it's not actually keeping you safe, right?
Hmm.
It's preventing you from letting yourself explore and be imaginative and be creative. Um, so you need to figure out a way around that voice.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a couple others that I don't know that we have to go through every single one of these, but a couple others that I think are important to recognize because they're not as obvious. If you have been micromanaged most of your
Mm,
life, like if you had parents who micromanaged you or a lot of bosses that have micromanaged you and sort of kept you on a very short leash, for lack of a better description, it
yep.
it's hard to be creative because somebody has been over your shoulder telling you how to do every step of everything you're doing um, for an extended period of time, maybe your lifetime, and that stifles your creativity. So breaking out of that requires you, one, to recognize that that happened or is happening, and two, either have a conversation to stop it from happening or figure out how to work around it. And so working around it, and I'll, like, the very end of this is the strategies, which are pretty self-evident, but the way of working around it really is changing your mindset. And that goes back to what we've already talked about in terms of getting into a creative mindset. And you can apply those in, again, you can apply those in relation to your family, in relation to your bosses, your coworkers, your kids, whatever it is. um, you can still put that to work for yourself. I think one of the biggest barriers to creativity, and I struggle with this all the time, is overthinking. And that
Yep.
becomes stifling because you're like, and this is what you were just talking about with the coloring and picking the color, right? Like you are evaluating and analyzing every single aspect of the possible outcomes and what could I do and how will it affect me. And like, once you're trying to make a decision, you're not able to because you're lost in that like hamster wheel of thinking about which way to go and how you should make the choice that you can't make the choice. And I know I get in that. And I don't know if it's a chicken or egg thing, but it definitely goes along with when when I'm struggling with my depression, or if I'm in a bad, I don't want to say bad, but in a harder state of mind, then the
Yeah.
overthinking really comes in. Um, so that is a big one. One that was listed that I hadn't really thought about, which just shines a light on my privilege, is culture. And, you know, when we talk about culture as a barrier to creativity, we mean your family culture, we mean the culture you were raised in, the culture sort of all around you. Like there's all sorts of layers of culture that come into play in this concept. And it's not about your inherent traits in yourself. It's about how you are sort of trained to function. And so there are some cultural barriers to creativity, and sometimes and that goes hand in hand with the micromanaging and the like all these other aspects come into play in this part of the conversation. And so maybe take the time to take a look at the culture you're raised in,
Mm.
the culture around you right now, and see, does it promote your creativity? Does it value creativity? And if not, what can you do to get into that creative mindset, right? What can you do to get into a growth mindset to change the way you're thinking about the world around you?
And just as an aside, and this is a much larger conversation, but it is very hard to be creative when you are hungry, when you are worrying about where you're going to sleep at night.
Yeah, it's impossible.
The concept of a starving artist is um um it is not a myth in the sense that like if you're choosing to be hungry because you're there for your art or whatever, but like if you're actually
Yeah.
hungry, it's hard to become an artist. So this is a plug that Riley was not planning on, but for like, I don't know, universal health care, like figuring out the housing crisis in our country,
Yeah.
like figuring out ways to have a social support system because there are corporate giants and creative geniuses and amazing people in this world, and people who also just deserve a chance to be able to curl up with a coloring book and some crayons and be creative that cannot do that
Yeah.
because forget the fact that they don't have the time. They may have the time. They just cannot do it
Yeah.
because of the stress and pressure that they are under to worry of filled with worry and dread.
Yeah.
And so once again, that is not the point of this, but I do want to just acknowledge that it is immensely hard to be creative when, if we're talking about culture, when you are worried about the bottom of the pyramid of your needs.
Yeah.
And there are
It
things that our society can do, and we are losing the opportunity as a society to benefit from all of these amazing people because
yes.
they have to struggle.
Yes. And no, this wasn't the point of this conversation today, but it's so important to recognize, which is why I, called out my own privilege of like culturally as a society, right? Like as an entire universe of people within the boundaries of the United States, we do not particularly value creativity. We don't value people stepping outside of the box of being different. I mean, it's getting better. It's certainly better than it was when you and I were kids. It's better than when our parents were kids, like et cetera, et cetera. And that's great. But we don't value it in the sense that we put it before making like all the money in the world, right? Like it's not valued in what it does. I mean, look at what gets the first cuts in educational
Yeah.
programming. It's the arts, right? Like it's extra activities outside of ELA and math and like that's it. And so I mean, if you feel like you live in a society that is not supporting your desire to be creative, you are, right? Like
Yeah.
you are. So don't feel crazy for having those thoughts or like you're the only one.
And I mean, the good news, I mean, corporations, in a sense, are leading it because they are recognizing that encouraging failure is benefiting them.
Yeah.
Like corporations recognize that encouraging ideas and failure and outside of the box thinking is benefiting them, but we need that to trickle down to allowing a world where people get the freedom to do that in their lives. And that
Yeah.
means we have to have a social safety net.
Yeah.
And at a 4-year anniversary of a timeline where we realized how little of a social safety net we had, and many people already knew, but then we all realized, it's just an important reminder because being creative, whether it, it is so important if you're listening to this that you find a way to be creative. This is an incredibly important how to
Yeah.
that you adopt in your life, because it can be such an important way to um, find calm in your life, find peace, find joy. Um, just a
Yeah.
great release and a way to connect with your kids, connect, do better at work. I mean, there's so many benefits to have creativity in your life.
Mm-hmm.
I know that you end this with celebrating progress and celebrating your creative achievements, but just the act of trying to be creative in itself is should be celebrated. And so I think that this kind of is inspiring me because I have a whole drawer of like different ways to be creative that I never go to. um, and I have set aside tomorrow as my day to do nothing. And I'm like, oh, what can I pull out of that drawer to sit on my couch and do while
Yeah.
I do nothing and watch Peaky Blinders? Um, Violence and creativity go hand in hand.
I mean, maybe.
So I think, we've learned a lot so far this season, but I just think this one is so important.
Yeah, because it's more than making a pretty picture. It's a way
Yeah.
of thinking, and it's an
Hmm.
expansive way of thinking, and it's a connection to a larger energetic universe. Whether you believe in God or spirits or the universe or souls or any of that stuff, it's still a connection. Like even if you don't believe in any of that, being creative connects you to the person next to you, to the neighbors, to the coworkers, to your kids. It's a connective way of thinking, and that in a world where people are really very lonely and isolated, it's a way of finding shared humanity and shared thinking, and that is more important than most things we do on a daily basis.
Well,
So
yeah,
nope, go
just
ahead.
really fast, really
Yeah,
fast.
yeah.
It's so yesterday was a mommy and my 10-year-old day, and we had a conversation, and I know I told you this story, but I I told him that by just spending the day with him, he was worried about beating me in bowling, and he did beat me both times because I'm not a very good bowler. Um, and I said, listen, just bowling with you is a win. Like that's winning. I get to go bowling with you. We get to have a day together. And he was like, oh, so you like hacked the system. It's like a life hack. And I was like, yeah, because like I'm not relying on the outcome to find joy in the experience.
Yeah,
And I feel like that's what creativity is. Like with
that's
being
right.
creative, it's like a life hack. It's like hacking the system because you can find joy in the process, especially if creativity isn't your like if you're not painting to sell the painting
Yeah.
as like a career.
Yeah.
Like if you're just doing it to like spark creativity in other parts of your life, it's a life hack, like in the truest sense of the word, to find some joy. So,
Absolutely. And anywhere we can find more joy right now is, in my opinion, a fantastic direction to go in.
yes.
Um So we encourage you all to try it out. I didn't write down homework for the week, but my thought process on the homework is to two things. One, take the time to think about and maybe even journal if you can about what are your roadblocks to creativity? What's getting in your way? Is it cultural? Is it micromanaging? Is it your family systems? Like what's in the way of your creativity? And how can you work around that? Like what can you do to make that better? And then the second thing, of course, is to do something creative, whatever that is for you. Um, maybe you like painting and art and things like that. So try that. Maybe you want to go to a museum or listen to a concert. Maybe you just want to do one of those wild brainstorming activities we talked about. Those are like, I'm going to try them. They seem really fun and like weird and out there and like, why not? So try out some way of being creative over the next week and see how you feel. Like be intentional about it. Do it and then check in with yourself to see how does this feel for me? Is this something that I want to continue doing? And just try different things if it isn't, right? Like don't give up on just one thing. So that's the homework for the week. As always, if you're looking for a place to, meet like-minded people or get support or have these sorts of conversations, but more in depth, we have our weekly women's circle. We would love to have you there. You can sign up for it on our website, goboldlyinitiative.com, or you can find it in the link in our bio at Go Boldly Together on our social media. And we would love to have you join us. It's a great place to really just be yourself and be comfortable. So, all of that being said, I think that's it for this week. We will be back next week with another how-to. And as we continue this season, and just real quick, like I said before, last week, I believe, if you have ideas on things you want us to talk about, reach out to us, send us a message or an email or whatever. We're happy to think about it and see if it's something that makes sense for the season. So, with that note, everyone, have a fantastic week, and we will talk to you all very soon.
Thanks so much for listening to We Go Boldly podcast. We know you're busy and we love spending time with you.
If you enjoyed this week's episode, let us know. Head to Apple Podcasts right now to rate and review our show. While you're there, be sure to click that subscribe button.
Want more us time? Follow us on all the socials at Go Boldly Together.
Want even more us time? As in all the coaching pizzazz. Find us at goboldlyinitiative.com for all the info.
We will be back with more excitement, research, and deep thoughts next week.
Until then, keep on being the bold, brave, amazing people we know you already are.